All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the McKinney Podcast. We celebrate what makes us unique by nature, and we have a special guest today. He's not just a regular guest, Mr. or Mrs. This is a doctor, Dr. Taha Ansari. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, we're just going to jump straight into it because this is going to be a long episode if it goes like the full conversation. It may be a normal size episode if we truncate some of this stuff. But Taha Ansari, by the time you hear this episode, the election has already passed. So there's 5 people in that race. So nobody's going to be the winner. You may be in the runoff. Yeah. You might not. Who knows? The voters get their say. But we're not really going to talk about the election. Okay. Other than I'd love to hear about why you ran and kind of what because you said about stepping out of your comfort zone. Most of the episode, we're going to talk about a subject that is extremely important to Dr. Ansari. There I said doctor twice, so for the balance of this episode, I'm just going to refer to you as Taha, if that's okay.
That's fine.
But anxiety, depression, chronic stress, dealing with the ups and downs, challenges of life, that's why we're going to spend most of our episode. We're going to get into the epic community controversy a little bit somewhere in there. Taha is of the Muslim faith. We're going to talk about some of the cultural implications of being good neighbors to our Muslim friends and colleagues here in our city. And that's really it.
Yep.
Anything on your mind before we get started?
Yeah,
Fred?
no, I just wish that we had pressed record when he first came in because we had a good 10 minutes of discussion of just about things. And I was like, oh, man.
I should have known he was going to show up that early. I was finishing up some work in here before. Most doctors are late because you make the patients wait in the waiting room for like 45 minutes.
Not me.
But not him. No, he's ready to go, man.
That's right.
So Taha Ansari, man, what is your before McKinney story? Where were you born? What's your family like? How did you find your way to McKinney? And then we'll get to the current stuff. Like, what's the background story?
So background story. So my parents are Indian.
Okay.
I was actually born in Saudi. This was 1985. My dad used to work in Saudi at that time. So I lived most of my life in India and Saudi till age 15. We used to go back and forth. We moved to Plano in 2000.
Okay.
And I started going to Plano East High School at 10th grade. Clark High School in 10th grade. And then from there on, I went to UT Dallas. And we've been in Plano for a long time. And then after that, I went to medical school. I went to residency. I came to McKinney in 2020, actually.
Okay.
And I've been here since then. But my first memory of McKinney is when we first moved to United States, we didn't have insurance. So we had to go to a free clinic in McKinney. Mm-hmm. And this was, I believe it was on El Dorado. And I remember driving by in McKinney. It was pretty much nothing at that point. Mm. But seeing McKinney now, how it's changed, that's quite a huge change.
Okay, so you're 15 years old. You've lived back and forth between India and Saudi Arabia. Yeah. How does your family come to America? Was it job? Was it college? How did you guys find your way over here?
My uncle, he used to be here. He lived in Midland. He was in oil and gas. Mm-hmm. So he had applied for a green card for my family, and that's how we came here. Okay. And my dad, he was in telecom at that time. And Dallas and this area was big. It was easier for him to find a job here.
Sure.
So that's why we moved here, good schools. So that's
okay. So you move here at 15. What was the greatest challenge from there to here?
Culture. Because, I know we were going to go into the epic community, right? So I grew up in a very sheltered community. So because early in 90s in Saudi, they were a very conservative country in the 90s. Now they're more leaning towards more liberal side. They have a lot more freedom. So I grew up, in a very cultured society where I knew my mom, my sister, my cousins, but I went to a segregated high school. So coming here in 10th grade, where you're in a high school.
Well, actually, explain that segregated high school. What was
only
that?
boys high school, girls high school.
Okay. All right.
It was completely different. We were not allowed to intermingle with females. So it was a very conservative country back in Saudi in the 90s. So to me, the biggest challenge was assimilating in the culture here. When you imagine going to high school and you see like James, all white. And then, all, and then you see the girls and guys in the same high school, it was like a big change for me.
Yeah.
So
Well, and forgive my ignorance here, but Saudi in the early '90s, and well, just the whole '90s, because you were there for the entire decade, is not exactly a diverse country like it is now. Like if you go over to like other parts of the Arabian Peninsula, in Dubai and Bahrain and other parts, and they're a very global city. If you're in Doha or Abu Dhabi or in any of that stuff, like people from all over the world are there. But back in the '90s, like it was a very homogeneous ethnicity, right? It's basically everybody there is Arab, some flavor of Arab, right?
yeah. So back in the 90s, the majority was Arab. A lot of the labor population used to come from India, subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. If you were an American at that point living in Saudi, you probably would be living in a U.S. compound.
Yeah.
So I didn't live in a compound at that time. My friends did, but I didn't. And you would go to a U.S. school. And these were schools that are kind of similar to U.S. school. I went to an Indian school at that point because I had an Indian citizenship at that point.
Okay. North India or South India?
I'm from South India.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of my close friends in grad school was from Hyderabad.
I'm from there too.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's where my family is.
Did you know each other? Did they know each other?
Well, there's like 2 million people in Hyderabad. It's a big city. Yeah,
sure.
But Shruti Bedapudi was her name, and she was wonderful. I adored her. She was the most fun. I learned so much about India and South, and like the difference between North and South India is huge difference. Like anytime I meet it, but like if I have like a personal connection, I'm just like North India or South India, because it's a big difference.
It's a big difference, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Hyderabad. Someday I will go to Hyderabad and hopefully I'll find Shruti.
They have the best food in India, period.
Okay. So what's the go-to food in Hyderabad? Is something curry?
So they have a Hyderabadi biryani, which is so that's the special brand of that comes from Hyderabad.
Man, I love a good biryani.
And is that like the high-end restaurant?
If you so if you want something similar to that, go to Deccan Grill in Irving, owned by my brother. So I'm just pulling his plug.
Shameless plug.
It's closest to what you can find in Hyderabad. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So if we go and say Taha sent us, is he going to like give us the good seat, the good table?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good table, good discount.
Dude, we've got to go over there.
We need, but it's not in McKinney though,
It's
right?
in Irving.
Okay, because
James. It's not going to be a McKinney podcast thing. It's just
right.
James and Fred going to see Taha's brother's restaurant so we can have some good biryani.
That's right.
There we go.
Yeah. So we have to kick it off because we talked about the podcast doing restaurant reviews
Once a month, showing up live, inviting all of our listeners and whatnot to come have lunch with us at a restaurant. And yeah, we really got to do that. We're going to start because 1 year is coming up. As we record this, we are 2 weeks away from our 1 year anniversary.
Elizabeth, my wife, reminded me of that the other day. She's like, part of this is supposed to be a restaurant review. Where are y'all with that? And I was like, well, let me talk to James. So here we are live saying, okay, James.
So where do you want us to go for the first one? Maybe we'll let you pick. What's your favorite spot in McKinney? Yeah.
Not a chain.
Can't be a chain. It
No
has to be a
franchise.
local.
Okay. So my favorite restaurant in McKinney is Noodle Wave.
Okay.
Noodle Wave. Where is Noodle Wave?
It's on 121 in El Dorado.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a Thai place. I think it's the best Thai place
Okay.
in McKinney.
Noodle Wave.
All right.
And if you want late night pizza, Zio Al. They're open till 3 a.m.
Yes, I've heard about Zio Al.
Wow. I don't.
But 3 a.m., I can't do that.
No. The only thing I'm doing at 3 a.m. is sleeping, bro.
That's all right. After we moderated the mayoral debate, we went to the Celt. I left there around 10 o'clock. I suffered the next day. Actually, we both did because we had chamber the next day.
Yeah.
Dragging.
I went to the Harvest in downtown McKinney after the debate. Really good restaurant too.
Oh,
Yes,
man.
Harvest. is
The
an
new
excellent
Harvest is
restaurant.
just as good as the old Harvest.
Yeah.
Steak was delicious.
Man, I'm telling you. Okay,
But
so
off of that, back to
sorry.
background.
So I wanted to figure out what that backstory was because anytime someone moves to America, I always know that's a big deal coming from somewhere else in the world. America's unlike any other country on earth. Just how diverse and how challenging it is because there's so many different cultures that all mingle together and make this little cocktail.
That's right. Okay, so growing up Filipino but born here in the United States, there were certain things that Filipinos were all involved in. Were you compelled by your parents to play a musical instrument?
No.
No.
I
Okay.
was only told to study.
Yes.
Either become a doctor or an engineer or lawyer. That's it.
Those are your only choices.
Those are your only choices.
And if you went against your parents on that, what were the results?
I wanted to be a Air Force pilot, but they were like, no. Period. So.
Man. Okay, so where'd you go to med school?
So I went to a med school. So I wasn't a really good student in undergrad. I partied too much. So I went to a Caribbean med school. I went to St. Matthews in Grand Cayman. I did 2 years there. Then I went to Chicago and Florida, and I did my third year and fourth year rotations completed those in Chicago and Florida.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Let's back this up here. So your parents were like insistent upon high performance academic career.
Yes.
And you just confessed that you partied it up in your undergrad.
Yeah.
Had your parents already passed away? Because how did you survive that?
It was tough because they wanted me to keep studying all the time. But, I was late night. I was just, on playing a lot of Counter-Strike. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I remember Counter-Strike.
Man.
Counter-Strike was the main reason why I didn't study too much. So that was an addiction. And that addiction, so, a lot of kids go through that. I understand if people say they're addicted to Fortnite, I get it. I was there.
Yeah.
But Counter-Strike was much better.
Counter-Strike.
For me, it was Call of Duty and Halo.
Call of Duty, exactly. That was my problem. I was too addicted to it.
Yeah. See, I grew up on the game that preceded Counter-Strike, which was Half-Life. But, and before you could, Counter-Strike was standalone. Counter-Strike was an add-on module to Half-Life.
Yeah.
And
Taha, what you got to remember is that Fred's a lot older than we are. No, he was born in 1970.
54. That's right.
Filipinos don't age that way.
No.
That's right. Tell that to my knee and my neck. Okay. Right? Because, those things are like 94.
Yeah, so African American folks have the phrase "black don't crack." What is it for Filipino?
Asian don't raisin.
Okay, man.
And that was told to me.
Man.
That was told to me by one of my very good white friends, which is kind of a racist statement. That so I don't want to say like I'm not racist because I have white friends.
You guys are different flavors of brown. You can get away with that. I cannot get away with that as a Wonder Bread white dude. There's certain things you're not allowed to say as a white guy.
That's right.
That's one of them.
That's right. But so James, and to everyone else that tunes into this, I give you permission to say Asian don't raisin.
Okay, so Taha, you're in med school. At what point did you decide, you know what, psychiatry is what I want to focus on? Because you do your full round of rotations. You did surgery and neuro and cardiothoracic and orthopedic and all of that stuff. How did you decide, you know what, I'm going to be a psychiatrist?
Actually, psychiatry was not my preference, to be honest.
Really?
In fact, my rotation was horrible. I had a terrible attending, and I felt like I didn't learn anything. That was not my preference. I actually wanted to be an oncologist.
Okay.
So the reason why I wanted to be an oncologist because when you actually talk to a patient who has cancer, they're going through a lot of emotions. Mm-hmm. And I was drawn to that. I was like, okay. And I remember this specific person who actually had really bad leukemia, and she did not have a lot of time. And we were just talking about death, and, that was a very heartful conversation for me to have. And at that point, I said, you know what, let me just do oncology. So I applied to a lot of programs. I actually applied to 4 programs in psychiatry as a backup. I was like, you know what? And I remember giving like close to 17 interviews for residency. The match results came out. I was like, this must be a mistake because I don't remember even ranking these last programs.
So, you were at the tops of those.
So I was very depressed. I was like, man, I'm going to New York. I was like, I didn't plan for this. I ranked my programs close in Texas first and neighboring states. New York was last on my list.
Yeah.
So I was depressed. And then I told myself, all right, let's give it 1 year. I'll do psychiatry. I'll give it, because at that point, psychiatry was actually easier to get into in programs. Mm. So I told myself, I'll work really hard. The hospital that I worked in, they had an emergency medicine program, surgery, internal medicine, psychiatry. They had a lot of programs. So I said, let's work hard, and then I will apply to something else. And I did. I was a workhorse, man, my first year. I was doing on-call shifts. I was going the extra mile. So I actually had offers from surgery, internal medicine, emergency medicine to switch. That was the point of, because now I have an option to actually switch. Yeah. Then I really had a hard conversation, and I really thought to myself, I really enjoy psychiatry because it actually puts me in a position where I'm actually not only helping people in palliative care, people who are going through end of life care, but I'm also helping people who are going through financial hardships, substance abuse, knowing a person's story, that to me felt like this is where I need to be. And that is when I decided, you know what, let's stick to this. And I kind of went into child psychiatry training after that, two extra years, because to me, I actually worked as a teacher before going to med school. To me, I was drawn to, helping kids, and that kind of tied into it. I'm like, you know what, I need to work with adolescents, kind of mold kids to, look forward to what they want to do in the future and how we can make that happen. So that's why I enjoy working with adolescents, knowing people. So
very cool. That. Now, so would you say that really that bedside manner, that compassion for the person who is, in that real terminal state, would you say that pretty much psychiatry was already on the map? You just didn't realize that's what drew, it wasn't necessarily oncology treatments, but more the getting to know the person.
Absolutely. To me, and anybody who wants to get into psychiatry or therapy, psychology, I always tell them, you really need to be invested in this. You can't just do it for the money or, because you like it.
Yeah.
Because you're taking on other people's burden. You're listening to their story. It actually there's times I feel down listening to people's stories. If I hear kids going through trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that gets to you mentally.
Yeah.
So, you really have to be well prepared. If anybody, student who's listening, if you're thinking about psychiatry or psychology, think about what you're getting into, because you need to be mentally strong yourself to go in this field. That's my advice.
Okay. So, but along the same lines, I hear people say all the time, well, physician, heal yourself. As someone in the field, and you recognize that that there is an affect, that you're being, there are certain things that just begin to weigh upon you. How do you cope with that?
I do a lot of meditation, man.
Oh.
A lot of meditation. There's times when I wake up at 3:00 in the morning and I just meditate and I pray, because to me, that's my way of venting. And so my thing is, when I work, I don't bring work home, period. Because any work stress, I don't discuss work stressors with my friends, family. I don't. If it's 5 p.m., that's my cutoff, and I don't bring that home. Because if you're being affected by your work and you bring that home, it affects your wife, your kids, your family. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's good. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I try to do a lot of meditation, and my policy is I don't discuss work, and I try to do things that make me happy. I play soccer, and you guys know Matt Wasami. So, I play soccer with him.
Oh, yeah.
So, I find my things that makes me happy, playing video games sometimes. So,
Wait, you're a grown man playing video games still?
Hey, don't you shame him.
You still can. You're not too old to play video games.
So I was a pre-med for 4 years. I spent a lot of time thinking I was going to be a surgeon, and then I got to organic chemistry, and it kicked my butt, and I lost that career path. So I have to ask a couple of questions down the line here. Talk to me about the difference between psychology and psychiatry, because a psychologist has PhD after their name. A psychiatrist has MD after their name. Completely different approaches, both definitely, mental health and wellness and whatnot. Both of those paths are very concerned about that. What's the distinction in your mind between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, other than just pushing meds? Because a lot of people think, well, a psychiatrist and a psychologist are basically the same, it's just the psychiatrist can push meds.
So psychiatrists, we prescribe medications. On top of that, we're trained somewhat in some type of therapies as well. So that's when we go through different trainings as far as internal medicine, knowing about the body, side effects, even the medications that we prescribe, you have to know about how does it affect your body.
Yeah.
Right. So we look at the whole picture as a psychiatrist. Psychologists, they're more trained in therapy. They're more in there's different types of therapies to begin with. And, psychodynamic, interpersonal, CBT, they do all of that. But on top of that, they do psychological testing, which is what differentiates them. So like, for example, if you want autism testing, you don't have to you have to go to a psychologist to get tested for that. If you want to be tested for, any ADHD, even sometimes they do depression. Most of it can be done by psychiatrists, but depression, any kind of personality assessments, they do those as well.
Okay.
So they're more trained in testing and therapies.
Okay. So your approach, and this is something I asked your permission on before, because when you think about the mental health and wellness side of things, anxiety, depression, chronic stress, even pain management, palliative care, like you said earlier, there's a lot of really strong medications that have a lot of side effects that, have addictive qualities as well. And it's something that it is a legitimate epidemic in this country, whether it's opioids or it's something akin to that, synthetics like, fentanyl and whatnot. How in the world do we as a society, we as a local community, how do we address the issue of pharmaceutical overuse and pharmaceutical abuse in kids and adults and whatnot? What's your take on how we start to make a dent in that? Because it's such a systemic issue in our community.
So the reason why we have an opiate epidemic is because we started prescribing. A lot of physicians started prescribing because it was easier to prescribe at that point in the earlier times. So then when it became an issue, and now we're kind of dealing with that. Why did we prescribe so many of them? Now there's an addiction issue.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we combat that? It's mostly they're doing a lot of good work as far as physician educating them about limiting prescribing these medications. Because long term, these medications, they're actually getting more potent. Fentanyl, you mentioned, is actually 10 times more potent than hydrocodone. So it's scary that, if you, and there's more stronger medication, because a lot of the times when I see patients in the emergency room, their urine is positive for fentanyl, opiates, methadone. I'm like, how did you use all of these and you're still alive? Yeah. So it's like, it's becoming out of hand. So we, as physicians, I think we need to do a stronger job in limiting the access to these medications. I know Colorado, when they made marijuana legal, so they did see a dip in actually opioid use when marijuana became legal. So I don't know where the marijuana industry is going, because that can be used as pain management too. So I don't know where that's going, because that's a very it's a controversial, and I'm open to those conversations about marijuana. I'm not shut off on that aspect. So.
Well, and it's a very challenging issue, because a lot of people, especially those that are, say, older than 50, have in their mind this idea of, this is your brain on drugs, and all like the anti-drug campaigns of the 80s and 90s. And it's really hard to have a conversation. And even the word choice between marijuana and cannabis, or cannabidiol, THC, active or not, whether it's CBD or some derivative, Delta 8, Delta 9, and whatnot. Like, there's so much complexity in the homeopathic natural alternatives to, opioids and synthetic pharmaceuticals and whatnot. It's really hard to have a conversation. What is your take on the intentional, medically guided use of some cannabis product or a derivative like CBD or whatever as an alternative to pharmaceuticals? Because recreational drug use is an entirely separate conversation. I'm talking about mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, chronic stress, chronic pain management, etc. Using it intentionally for something like that. Recreational drug use aside, I don't necessarily support that. But as an alternative to opioids, I'm certainly open to that, because opioids, man, they can wreck lives.
Yeah.
What's your take on that as a medical professional?
I think if we look at, as a medical professional, we should look at, are there studies done, right? So even the psychiatric medications, for example, that I prescribe, they have lots of side effects.
Yeah.
The antipsychotics, they're toxic. So everything has to be prescribed based on the dose. We'll look at how much research has there been done on it. And that's how we prescribe these medications, right? So marijuana, for example, I know there's some benefits to it. There are pain benefits. It helps with seizures. It helps with anxiety. Patients sometimes they tell me, hey, your Prozac takes 3 weeks for it to work with anxiety. Marijuana, it takes 30 minutes. So, I get it.
Yeah.
So where is this conversation headed in the future? Does it have a place? Should we start looking into, adequate dosing?
Yeah.
What age? That to me, because I don't think marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug anymore, so now you can do a lot more research on it. I think we need more data on this.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. Be open-minded. Let's do research on that.
My thinking is you want to take the legs out of illegal drug use and the people that are, growing stuff and producing it and distributing it, and who knows what's in it, if it's cut with other products, if there's something else in there. These kids that are buying a dime bag from their buddy at school or whatever, you want to just cut the legs out of the drug trade, legalize it like tobacco, regulate it like tobacco, make all of the production professional. If something is done in a professional facility, the drug trade is going to have a huge problem if it's legal to obtain, but is highly controlled. And I have a really hard time with the people that are just like, no cannabis.
So we actually did when I was in residency, our hospital, we did a presentation in American Psychiatric Association. So we actually looked at that. And one thing that we learned from that is marijuana industry should actually learn from the alcohol industry.
That's right.
Because they legalize it in such a way that, there's an age limit.
Yeah.
If you go, I don't drink alcohol, but if you go and get a product, you know what you're getting in that product, right?
Yes.
So same thing, marijuana industry can learn from that. If some company, let's say Budweiser is selling marijuana, right?
Yeah.
You know what's in your product. It's standardized, it's regulated, and we can restrict it to an age group so we know that children don't have access to it.
Yeah.
I think they can learn a lot from the alcohol industry.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that what you had said there at the very end and what you followed up with, being the senior ranking member in the room here, I remember when home breweries were a thing. Mm-hmm. And, like when I was in college, I remember talking to guys who were like, yeah, man, like I've got this set up at my home. And I was like, man, so you're basically like a moonshiner, brewing your own thing. And they were just experimenting. And I would check in with these guys. Okay, so how'd that last batch go? And they were like, oh, it was terrible, all these other things. But now we have all these, IPAs? I don't drink either, so I don't know. But, it used to be there was, Bud, Miller, whatever, just very few. But now, I've seen where they're advertising, we have this IPA, we have this, whatever that pale ale and the Indian this and all those other things. So I do agree with you that there is something to be learned there with that at the same time. And I do agree with you, James, that, as being part of the over 50 club, that as soon as someone says anything, marijuana, cannabis related, my initial thought is exactly that, is like, you're going to become
the egg in the frying pan,
a stoner or whatever.
Yeah.
But my father was a psychiatrist. And when, I don't know, back in the exceptional Stone Age, I remember him telling me that he could not prescribe and that he would get into arguments with the pharmacist about what they needed and what they didn't need. And his solution was never wasn't drugs are bad or medication is bad. It was all, let's try things. And he would have, he had a very broad approach to it. But, he said at some point there has to be some medication if necessary. And, and he would tell me that, some of his, because he worked at the state mental institutions, and he would tell me, that he had 3 Jesus Christs, 2 popes, Elvis, these guys that had these, severe conditions, and other people where they were just, they just needed some help. But with that, when he was first into specifically his psychiatric practice, which he loved it so much. Also, you remind me a lot of him, is that it took him 3 times of retiring to finally leave it behind because he did love it so much. But he would tell me that when he first started that electroshock therapy and lobotomies were part of the standard fare. But
which is just insane to think about.
That is
it's absolutely insane.
But he saw that over time they did do more research and realized that this is overall not good. And so they.
You mean cutting people's brains out of their head?
Or just,
who knew? What a concept!
Or it's like you've got an issue here. Look, a 9-volt. And he was like that, and he was very glad to see that move along. And on the same side of that, I remember learning about things like Zoloft and lithium, and using that as my Asian kid. I was way advanced, so my humor, I'd tell people, "Oh, you need lithium," and they're like, "What?" Of course, you say that nowadays. You think
you're talking about battery
powering a car, and I'm like, "That's the stuff they used to prescribe." So obviously, you're not licking batteries and stuff. But with that, and talking about the whole cannabis thing. By the way, disclaimer: we're not giving out medical advice here, right?
We're asking questions.
That's right. We're asking questions. Do you see that ultimately cannabis and things like that, will get regulated out? Or do you think that ultimately, just like with the microbrewery thing, you see it becoming just a standard?
I think it will be 10 years from now. I think marijuana will become legal. I think it will be prescribed by a lot of physicians. I'm actually prescribing some. So in Texas, we can do compassionate care. So
what is that?
So like I have one kid who has severe intellectual disability and autism to a point where I've tried a lot of psychiatric medications to control the aggression, but it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So the only option is compassionate. So I'm not prescribing marijuana. I'm only recommending that, hey, this patient may benefit from marijuana use. So mom can actually take it to any compassionate care program and then be like, hey, I have a letter from a doctor recommending it. So then they can actually apply for that and they can get marijuana. And actually this marijuana actually helped this kid out.
Mm-hmm.
There's less aggression.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it does have some place, but we just need more research.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 years from now, things will be different. And we, as a society, we need to have an open mind. It may have a place in the future. So.
Yeah, what changed my mind, this was 10 years ago, because, 10 years ago, I was definitely a, marijuana, devil's lettuce. It had absolutely nothing to do with it. But I watched a documentary on a man who suffered from Parkinson's. Yeah. He could barely communicate, tremors, all the things. And, he had a blunt, and took a couple of puffs from it. And you could just see, the tremors settled down. He was able to communicate with his family. And, as a Christian conservative, for me to say stuff like, man, there is a place for it. It rocks people's world. Yeah. But when I saw that, I said, there's got to be something there. And, like I said, I'm not saying this or that or any of those other things, but I've seen in this documentary that it did make a strong difference.
Yeah, I agree. We should just look at evidence at the end, moving forward, and do more research.
Well, I think the stereotype, and this we turned this into a cannabis episode. I didn't really intend for it to be
the cannabis episode featuring
Dr. Taha Ansari. The stereotype of somebody, rolling a blunt and smoking it, that is so 20 years ago. Whether it's tinctures, if it's drops under the tongue, if it's some sort of edible thing, depending on the delivery. I mean, it's so many different applications based on what you're trying to accomplish. And if it's chronic stress or pain management, you're not going to smoke a blunt. You're going to take a dropper, put a drop or two under your tongue, and it's going to hit your bloodstream almost immediately. And these stereotypes of what this is fueled by the Food and Drug Administration
and rap culture from the 90s, man. I grew up on Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, and I have one picture in mind. But I think that you
don't get me wrong. Snoop is definitely rolling his blunts.
Still, and he's got some mad lyrical skills. But I love that when I asked you that question, how do you care for yourself? What you said was you have an outlet. Yeah, you have an outlet. And that you play soccer and you meditate and you pray. Of course, for me at 3 a.m., if I wake up at 3 a.m., it's a bladder issue. It's not a something's troubling me.
Do you have anything for Fred's bladder, Taha?
Can you talk to my bladder?
Yeah. So I want to pivot for a second, or not a second, a few minutes, and talk specifically about tactics and strategies. Something we haven't really talked about in this podcast is my own mental health journey. November 6th of 2023. I was traveling for a speaking engagement. 22 and 23 and 24, I was trying to launch a speaking career in the insurance world. And I was in New Orleans. I had just earlier that day been on stage in front of 500 or so of my peers, and I had a panic attack. And I left the ballroom where there was a happy hour thing, and I went to my hotel room to try to gather myself, and ended up having a full-on panic attack, laying on the floor, clutching my chest, staring at the ceiling, going, am I about to die? What on earth is happening right now? It was the byproduct of 8 months of extreme stress that I had put on myself. And through that, I discovered I'm at the end of my rope. I don't have what I need to deal with the anxiety that I had just normalized over the course of years. And there was a certain amount of physical tension in my chest that was always there, always. And through the course of talking to a therapist, which I'd been in for a couple of years, and talking to a psychiatrist and whatnot, we made the choice to start getting on medication. And Lexapro is what we settled on. And over took probably 2 or 3 months to start to feel kind of normal again. wasn't able to sleep, had to get on trazodone for like a sleep aid. And now I'm, a year and a half after that, and I'm pretty normal. But I recognize the importance of realizing that you're not able to just white knuckle it and get better on your own. That whether it's meditation or therapy or counseling or some sort of medical intervention, it's so important for our listeners to get the message that it's okay to not be okay. What do you want to tell the people listening that maybe are at a place where they're starting to realize they need to do something beyond just try harder and work harder to feel better and convince themselves, oh, you just need to change your attitude? What are the steps to get better where you start to engage with professionals, whether it's, a counselor or therapist or medical intervention of some kind, or, Eastern practices, meditation, Zen, Buddhist practices or something, akin to that? What kind of advice do you have for people that are just recognizing, you know what, I'm not okay, and I'm not really getting better, and I want to get better? How do you suggest they start that conversation?
So one thing that I would focus first is that, listen, mental health, there's a stigma that comes with it. You're seeing a psychiatrist, you're seeing a therapist, there's something wrong with you, right? That stigma, we need to kind of get rid of that. There's actually nothing wrong with you. What's happening to you is that these are life stressors, it could be genetic, and most people have psychiatric issues. We need to get rid of that stigma, and that's what we as a society need to do a better job. If you go to your medical doctor, for example, if you have hypertension, you don't have that stigma attached. But why is it attached to mental health?
Yeah.
And depression, anxiety, panic attacks, these are pretty common things. We all go through trauma in our lives. We all go through a hard time. And I'll tell you, life is not easy. It's not that, if you have a challenge that comes to you, guess what? Once you solve that, there's going to be a bigger challenge. So repeated trauma can cause depression, anxiety. Some people cannot function in a stressful situation. In your situation, panic attacks. Panic attacks, to be honest, they differ from generalized anxiety, because panic attacks, you don't know when it's coming. And there's a fear that you have. You're like, when is the next panic attack coming for you?
Yeah.
So to that, you start looking at, okay, how do I need to address these things? You start seeing a therapist. If you need to be, I'm actually, if you come to me, I'm the last person who'll prescribe to you medication. I'll prescribe as a last resort. I first discuss, okay, let's manage your stress. Let's manage your anxiety. What are some other ways? Can you meditate? Can you distract yourself in a situation when you have a panic attack? Can you find yourself an isolated room? Can you breathe in a paper bag? Can you slow down your breathing? Because a lot of the times, anxiety and panic attacks, you're in that moment, you're like feeling overwhelmed. So there's techniques. You can do square breathing techniques, which is slowing your breathing down 4 seconds at a time. If you look it up, there's a great YouTube video on how to do square breathing technique. Mm-hmm. You use techniques like that. If you're depressed, you start looking at, start to have a positive mindset, as in, okay, why am I feeling depressed? What are the reasons why I'm feeling this way? How can I do things better?
Yeah.
You got to start looking at from different angles. What you're going through is actually complete. Everybody goes through this thing. It's normal. We need to be more resilient, in, especially when treating mental health.
How do you feel about grounding? Because that's kind of a hot topic right now, with the whole concept of standing barefoot in the grass or putting like a grounding sheet on your bed and whatnot, like managing the electrical charge and the polarity of your body as a whole. Like, how do you feel about grounding?
Is it evidence-based? So that's why I look at, has it been proven?
Yeah.
I don't think it's proven, and I don't know anybody who actually does that.
Okay.
So
it's funny you mentioned grounding. Now the whole sheet thing, I don't quite understand that, but of all things, I was outside. I was out looking out my window, and someone in my neighborhood, he comes walking along, and he's barefooted, and I see him. There's a green belt right outside my window, mm-hmm. and he's standing there. He's kind of like positioning his feet, and and I'm like, what is he doing? And so one of my clients happened to be in the studio, and I just happened to look out, and she said, "Oh, he's grounding," and I was like, "What's that?" And the whole electrical thing. And so I looked it up, and while I didn't find a lot of evidence on it, because I'm always curious about things, I started thinking just being outside, sunshine is a natural antidepressant. That's why in the winter, when things are really gray, more people are depressed. And I was like, man, there might not be any hardcore evidence, but I think just being outside is like a great way to combat those things. And maybe it's been delivered as grounding, but in actuality, it's sunshine, infrared light.
I don't know which psychiatrist came up with the name seasonal affective disorder and call it SAD. I'm just like, somebody had a good joke there.
Right.
Like, that's nice.
Yeah. That's right.
But we know vitamin D actually has a benefits in treating depression. So it's as human beings, we actually were designed to be social, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what's happening now is that we're too isolated. We're always in our rooms, always in our iPads, always playing games, or we're not social anymore. Our interaction also is on Facebook. So to me, we need to be more social. We need to go outside more, go and get more vitamin D. If you're talking to people, you'll be less depressed.
Yeah. Literally talking to people, not antisocial, social media, social.
Yes.
All right. And on that, I had the question that just left me. I'm going to need some ginkgo biloba to, attach to this. Oh, I remember what it was. It seems to me that there are a lot more people who are suffering from being triggered. As James, as you mentioned, the panic attack, and you don't see when it's coming. In your professional career, have you seen more people triggered? Is this like a recent thing, or has it always been there? And now there's just a classification of it.
What do you mean triggered?
People are triggered, like, that triggered me when he said this or they did that. All of a sudden there's this unexplainable emotional
inability to regulate
response.
one's emotional response, whether it's anger or fear or panic or anything like that.
Where's that coming from? To be honest, that's why I asked, why are you triggered? Is it because you're triggered because you're depressed and slight irritation makes you trigger? Or do you have severe anxiety to a point that is that triggering you? Is that making you feel more irritable? So I think there's an underlying cause people get triggered, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I look at, and I'm a lot of the time people, they lash out, they get angry easily, right? There's usually an underlying reason. Usually depression is, I've noticed that depression is the underlying reason. So that needs to be looked at. So.
Are we good to move on to the faith conversation and end it? Because we're about 42 minutes into recording now.
Just so fast.
It's so fast. We didn't have much time. We need 2 hours for this.
We didn't even talk about the whole, why did you run thing and all the other stuff.
Why did you run? Like, why did you step out? Because early before we started recording, thank you, Fred, by the way.
I was like, there's something else.
There was something else. You decided to run for public office with no prior experience in government. I don't think you've served on a board or a commission with the city or anything. No. You threw your name in the hat. You go from private citizen to, I want to be an elected official. Talk about that. What is it that was in your head of, you are very successful, you have whatever you want. You have a family, you have wife, kids, job you love, career and everything, hobbies, all the things, meditation, video games, whatever else you choose to spend your time on. Motorcycle. What is it that made you say, you know what? I'm going to spend 20 hours a week for the next 3 months putting my name out there to be an elected official in our city. Walk us through that. What is it that you want to accomplish through this process for yourself, for your own development, for your own evolution as a human? And why did you choose to put your name out there for District 1 or the at-large 1?
So that's a big question because there's a lot of reasons why I'm running. A lot of reasons. So I've seen things that are happening at a level where I don't have any control over. I see patients who are going through financial hardship. And before we started, Fred and I were talking about how everybody's living paycheck to paycheck, right? There's substance abuse. There is marital issues, kids having a hard time in school. I feel like I'm doing a good job in my work, but it's out of my hands at the end of the day. When somebody leaves my clinic, somebody leaves my office, I'm not doing much. So that's one reason. But you personally, as a human being, I always read articles here and there. Okay, this is happening in the world. This is happening in the city. And I look at politicians, and I sometimes think, dude, these guys are so horrible. Why? I can do a better job, right? So and everybody has this thought. You have that thought too. You look at other politicians like, I can do a better job. I know this better than them, right? So I always thought, man, I should get involved. Finally, I decided, you know what? I need to get out of my comfort zone. As human beings, we only live once. If you have some passion, if you think you can do a better job, if you think that you can make a difference in somebody's life, and do it. Because to me, we all chase happiness, right? Happiness to me is serving others, making other people's life better. If you want the cure for depression and want to be happy for the rest of it, don't focus on yourself.
Yeah.
Don't focus on what do I want? Where's my happiness? Focus on other person's happiness, making other person's life better. Trust me, you will be happy in the long run.
Yeah.
That was my motivation. And I said, you know what? I only live once, man. This is it. You want a motorcycle? Go get your motorcycle. You only live once.
I don't know if Elizabeth would be okay with that.
It's like we just won't share this episode with her.
I had a motorcycle, and my wife told me to get rid of it.
Really?
Because I didn't drive it enough, and it was dangerous. Yeah. And I was happy to get rid of it because
you had that experience. You have that experience. You lived a life where you had a motorcycle.
Yeah.
If you want to do something, this is my message for all the kids out there. Okay, I see a lot of kids. You're especially the adolescent. You're in an age where you need to try things. Play soccer. Go in MMA, try individual sports, try new things. If you want to do something, try. Even if you fail. If I fail this election, you know what? 10 years from now, if I meet you, James, and you say, hey, you remember you ran for that election? I'll be like, yeah, I did it. I tried.
Yeah.
I may have failed, but you know what? At least I did something. I put my name out there. I made sure that I give my 100%.
Are you familiar with Teddy Roosevelt's speech, The Man in the Arena?
No.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite speeches ever. Basically, it's, talks about the man who steps out, or person. In I think it was 1910 is when he gave that speech. It basically talks about, hey, you did it. Even if you don't win, you still did it. Like, you get to say that you were there, you were participating, you were striving. You're not one of those, as the phrase goes, one of those timid souls who lives in a gray twilight, knowing neither victory nor defeat. And it's like, it makes you think about the keyboard warriors who have a comment for everybody. The Tuesday morning quarterback people who watch an NFL game from their couch. Yeah. They can't even run a 5K. Yeah. And they want to talk about how much a quarterback stinks. Yeah. I was like, really? You have lacking in self-awareness here? Like, you really want to talk about this professional athlete?
It's hard. It's hard. Putting yourself in this situation. Like, I could have quit medical school. I could have been like, you know what? Yeah. I'm not going to make it. You have to have a resilience at some point saying, you know what? I'm never going to give up. I'm going to keep trying, trying. If you don't have time, but if I tell you the life that I had in medical school where I lived in one couch, no bed, trust me, I used to sleep in my car. That was a lot. I went through a very hardship in medical school. I didn't have money. You put yourself in tough situations. Even this race, right? I went to my first the campaign kickoff for Tammy Warren, and then I went to the next campaign kickoff for Jure Feltis. I'm new to politics. I don't know what's happening. I went to both of those, and I saw Jared Ty, and I left Jure Feltis thinking, what did I get myself into? This is not where I belong. But being today in this position, I'm happy I did this. Because you know what? I can do a better job. I know most of these politicians. I know what they think like. I can read through their minds, I'm in a better position. So I'm happy I'm in this position, to be honest. I put myself out.
Well, and the beautiful thing, Taha, is even if you don't win, even if you're not picked by the voters, you have still grown as a human. You've gained new experience. You've gained the opportunity to talk to so many people in our city and hear from them on what's important to your neighbors and the other people that live in McKinney, which means that you are so much better equipped to be a contributor in our city in some other way, perhaps on a board or commission, perhaps running for office again at some time in the future. Regardless of the outcome, you're still better for it. As I just love municipal politics because it is as organic and personal as it gets. State politics and federal politics, you're not shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, and with your constituents day in and day out.
And it's bipartisan. You're working with everybody. You're helping.
Well, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
There's a lot of people that want to attach a D or an R to it, and
we tell them that doesn't matter at this level.
At the end of the day, I'm like, dude, I'm here to help everybody. Citizens, your neighbors. So.
Yeah. So, and I know this episode will drop after the election.
Yeah. You know what? We can make it drop the Monday during early voting.
Yeah. So
this is your call, not mine.
Yeah.
So.
You know what? Executive decision. And I know I'm correcting myself here. Let's drop it a week from Monday.
Let's do it.
Taylor Willingham has to drop on Monday. We already promised him that. We tried to record with Taylor like a month and a half ago. And Taylor's a busy guy. He wasn't able to make it work for the schedule. So Taylor has to drop next Monday.
So good.
You're going to drop the Monday. What is that? It is what is that Monday? Hold on. Yeah. Sorry, everybody listening to this. We will. So that is the 28th. Yeah, 28th of May. So there'll still be 3 or 4 days of early voting left, and then obviously Election Day. I don't know why we had the schedule the way it was. We're going to mess with the schedule, and your episode's going to drop on April 28th. Right. So it's still
much apology to the editors, but it's going to happen. Yeah. So with that in mind, how do you feel that your medical background, specifically in the field that you're in, how do you feel that makes you the qualified candidate?
I listen, man. I mean, we have politician at the end of the day. You're listening, right? You're listening. I thought about this a lot. You're representing as a city council. What does that mean? You're representing the people. You're representing them. I'm not doing this to represent myself. I'm a nobody. I'm representing people of McKinney, right? That to me matters. And the last so I've gone through the phase of, okay, can I be a good candidate? Am I in the position to run, right? Now I'm actually wondering what it actually means to win. So I've actually thought about people, they message me, they're like, hey, we're voting for you. And that actually is getting to me in my head. It's like somebody is going to wake up in the morning, drive to a polling station, and out of all those 5 names, they're going to put your name, and they're actually believing in you. That means a lot to me, man. Somebody is putting their time and effort and thinks that I will be a better candidate. Dude, that's power, man. That's why to me it's like I need to listen at the end of the day. I work with children. I work with veterans. I work with adults. I work with geriatric population. I work with homeless. I work with patients who are going through mental health, substance abuse. I listen to people. I know what they're going through. I may not have the board experience, but at the end of the day, I have the credentials. I question a lot. I question the board. I question the research. I question what's out there. And I'm just here to listen to the people. And that's what the job description is. It's not how many boards you've served, what experience you have. It's how well are you able to listen to your constituents. That's why I think I'm doing this.
So if or when you get elected, you're going to have an excellent, client base, because half of the people are absolutely on fire for the airport, and the other half are absolutely terrified. Not terrified, but completely against the airport. So you'll be able to listen to a lot of people at that point. But airport aside, what would you say is your top concern?
My biggest concern is rapidly how we're growing. To me, do we actually have the infrastructure, right, to maintain that? That's my biggest concern. And I fear that, with everything, all the developments that are happening, I'm just afraid there's going to be a more divide. And I kind of fear that. And I really hope that regardless if you're for the airport, not for the airport, at least hearing those sides or their concerns is more than enough to me, because you're making sure that their voice is being heard. Even if you're for or against, you're listening to both of them. To me, that is the priority, growth and listening to everybody.
Well, and as far as job security goes, you got to know how great it is, because regardless of what the outcome is of the election, there's going to be a lot of people struggling with anxiety and depression after May 3rd because their candidate didn't win.
That's right.
It doesn't matter which side you're on. Somebody's candidate's not going to win, and they're going to need great psychiatric care. So they should call Dr. Taha Ansari at Baylor Scott White McKinney. So if you're Folks, if you're suffering from anxiety or fear related to your candidate not winning the election this year, call Dr. Taha Ansari at Baylor Scott White.
The people who I'm running against, I'll tell you, they're actually I've spoken to all of them on a personal level. They're actually very good guys. If either one of them wins, I have full confidence they'll do a good job. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I think
they're good guys.
Yeah. That's admirable that you would say that.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting situation that we have with your race and with the mayor's race, because all of the candidates are really strong. I have pretty strong opinions about the District 3 race, as it's not relevant for this conversation. That's the only race of all of the races that we have this go around where, in my opinion, is very clearly one candidate is not fit for office. The other candidate is very fit for office. Yeah. But with the 4 mayor candidates, like Dr. Rastami is a wild card and he's a maverick. He's the most unpredictable of all 4 of them. But I honestly believe if somehow he got elected, he'd be a good mayor. I don't have any problem with that. The other 3, obviously they would be a good mayor. They all have the competence. They all have experience. They all have the right viewpoints. All of them. Yeah. Your race, all 5 candidates would be a good city council person for different reasons. Yeah. Like the people of McKinney have a very difficult choice to make because honestly, all 5 of those candidates deserve votes.
Absolutely.
There's not a single one of those 5 people where you're like, why are you running? Yeah. Why would anybody vote for you? Yeah. Like it's not like that at all.
And if any of them in the future, they reach out to me, I'll be happy to help them. So, that's because I'm confident that they'll do a good job too. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, Fred?
So are we going to get to Epic or we got to?
No, we're out of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about the Epic briefly.
Yeah.
So
the Muslim community down in it's East Plano Islamic community or something. Yeah. What's help us understand there real quick.
So Epic community, what they're planning on doing is they want to build a Muslim-only city, but technically anybody can, even James can live there. But majority will be a Muslim population. They will have a mosque. They'll have their own school, their own activity centers, geriatric centers. But it's not. It's design. It's so Epic City. Technically, the mosque is not funding that project. It's by a capital group or something like that. So they're the ones who are funding it. But a lot of Muslims are going to live there. Yeah. So to me, here's few things that I have to say about that. One, we're living in U.S. We have to obey laws of the United States and Texas, right? We have to make sure that those laws are not broken. So I think Epic is working on that. 2, Epic actually does a really good job in the Collin County. They actually provide a lot of resources for shelters. They do a lot of charity work for Collin County. So we should not make it jeopardize. We should not put hatred towards that community, the Muslim community, and Epic, because they do actually do a lot of work. Yeah. So we shouldn't, be negative against that. As far as what they want to do, here's my view on that. I would rather live in McKinney next to neighborhoods, because in my neighborhood, I have Nigerian, I have Christians, I have Hindus, I have Indians, I have white. As a society, I told you in the beginning that I grew up in Saudi in a sheltered environment. To me, it was a big change when I came to the U.S. in 10th grade. Our kids need to learn from other cultures. They need to learn from white culture, Christians, Hindus. That's how we need to assimilate and learn from one another. To me, I really hope that I can talk to Epic community, be like, hey, you're isolating yourself in Josephine. What does the future for your kids look like? Yeah. That is my biggest concern with the Epic community is that. And Matt Rostami lives in my neighborhood. He's an alien. So I live with all these different cultures, and I have an alien living in my neighborhood, Matt Rostami. So it's better if we assimilate and live and learn from each other.
The only thing I'll say as the token white person in this conversation is there is a lot of stereotype comments made by white Americans about any Muslim community anywhere. And I think there is a pretty stark lack of understanding among generic Southern white America about what it is to be a Muslim living in America. You are a practicing Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
You are a stereotype for the epic community. And the people that just paint such a broad brushstroke about this is bad, this is evil, these people are infiltrating our society, they're going to practice Sharia law and have jihad coming out of this place. It's like, whoa, tap the brakes. Like, there's a huge amount of dynamic differences, variations, complexities within the Muslim community. You got dozens of countries represented over thousands of miles. I was like, I would just challenge anybody who feels tempted to say something like, well, that's just evil, or they're dangerous. It was like, have you ever spoken to a practicing Muslim? Like, have you ever had a conversation? Do you have a neighbor that you've had coffee or lunch or dinner with? Have you been to their home? Have they been to your home? Do you actually know what those people are like? Like, get to know them before you start saying things like that, because that is the opposite of how we should be acting, folks.
That's how we see it as, growing up to me is like, oh, they're white, we don't act that way, right? Or they're black, they act differently. But to me, we need to change that mindset. We need to start let's talk to each other. Let's get to know us. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all on the same page. We all want the same thing.
Yeah.
We all want safety. We want our kids to grow in a good environment. We want to learn from each other. We want to live happily. So let's talk to each other, get to know each other. That's what it is. I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm sure you don't want to hurt me.
No.
We're not.
Yeah. Man, I would love to continue this conversation. And then next time you come in, we'll talk more about what it is to integrate and have neighborly conversations with folks that don't look like you.
Yeah, we might have to do the victory lap of interviews with everybody who ran, who won. And hopefully that might be you.
Okay. And here's the thing. If you're voting for Taha, vote. If you're voting for Jim or Ernest or Derek or Brian, vote.
That's right.
Vote.
Get your butt to the polls and go vote. We got to wrap this up because we got Taylor sitting outside, don't we?
No, I don't see him. I don't see him yet. So
okay. Well, then I don't feel so bad. Then I thought he was going to be sitting there waiting. Okay. Any last words? Any call to action you want to have, Taha?
Thank you for having me. You guys are great. What you guys do for the city. Again, I think we need more programs like this to bring awareness to the city. So
totally agree.
Absolutely. McKinney first.
McKinney first. There you go.
Love that.
All right, folks, it's been another episode of McKinney Podcast, celebrating what makes us unique by nature. Get your butt to the polls May 3rd. Early voting starts April 22nd and ends, April 20... It's like April 30th?
April 29th.
April 29th, and then May 3rd is Saturday, May 3rd is the election.
That's right.
I don't know why they have election day on a Saturday. That's just
so
weird.
that everybody can turn up.
There you go. All right, that's all for now, folks. Y'all take care.
Thank you.